right, welcome to Spreadsheet Geek. Today I want to talk about something called absolute cell references and show you how to use them. I'm going to start by showing you kind of a neat spreadsheet. It shows you, it's got a list of items that you can purchase, maybe for a home improvement project. Their prices, how many of those you would purchase, a subtotal, a bulk discount. If you buy a certain amount, you get a bulk discount, an adjusted price, which subtracts the bulk discount, your sales tax, a total for that item, and a grand total. So it calculates all this based on the prices and the quantities of the items that I've purchased. It's got this little section down here called assumptions. And so right now it's showing that there's a 6% sales tax rate. And I live in Michigan. That's our sales tax is 6%. But if you travel, the sales tax can change in different states. So let's say I was in a different state and the sales tax rate was 7%. If I change that to a 7, you're going to see that my sales tax numbers here in column G all just changed to reflect that 7% instead of 6%. If I were to travel to a state with no sales tax and I change that to 0, all of my sales tax goes away. The item totals dropped. My grand total just dropped. If I change that to 8%, all of those change. My item total changes. The grand total changes. So I can play around with the sales tax rate and the entire spreadsheet adjusts itself accordingly. Also, right now I'm getting a bulk discount quantity for when I buy 10 or more items. So you see the first two items I'm buying 11 and 75, so I'm getting that bulk discount. I'm not getting a bulk discount for those bottom three items because I'm not buying 10. If the bulk discount rate quantity were to change to 50, for instance, let's say you have to buy 50 of something to get the bulk discount, and I change that, you'll see that my top bulk discount disappears or becomes 0, and let's forget that like money. That becomes 0 because I'm not buying 50 of those. If I adjust this to 5 and hit enter, you'll see that now I get a bulk discount for everything except for the grout that I'm only buying 3 of. So it responds really well to a change there. Right now we're assuming that the bulk discount is 10%, so you save 10% if you buy 5 or more. If I were to change that to an 8% and hit enter, those bulk discounts all drop from 10% down to 8%. So the spreadsheet has this little assumption section that is really good for speculating and saying what happens if I go to a different state with a different sales tax, or if I do have 6% sales tax in Michigan, what happens if in a couple years that's the legislation happens to change that sales tax rate. This is something that might change over time. It's not probably going to change today, but over time it might, and that's something that I might want to play with. The same thing for the bulk discount quantity. If the supplier decides that they want to change their discount quantity to 20 items to earn that discount, that's something that might change in the future. The policy of the store might change. So that's something that's subject to change. It's probably not going to change today, but over time it might change, and we can play around with it and check it out. The same thing for the discount rate. That 8% today might change to 10% in the future. And we want our spreadsheet to reflect that. These numbers are today, right now, current policy numbers, and they might change over time. So this is a really good spot to use this combination of assumptions, and the tool that makes it work up here is absolute cell references. So I want to look at how to do that and how this is set up. So I'm going to go over to, I got another tab here for the unfinished one. So this one doesn't have any of the functions or formulas in it to do the work. It's just already set up with the items that I'm buying, the prices and the quantities. These are things that, just the raw data that you would enter. I've got this little assumptions section down here for the sales tax, the bulk discount quantity, and the bulk discount rate. So the first thing I'm going to look at is how to do subtotal. So the subtotal is just equal to the price times the quantity. So that shows up as being B2 times C2. And if I hit enter, it multiplies those numbers together and gives me 119.79. It suggests an autofill. So am I going to do pretty much the same formula for the other 4 items that are here? I am, so I'm going to accept that autofill. I lost my bottom border, so I'll put that back. So if I show the formulas, here's what happened when we did the autofill. I entered equals B2 times C2. When it autofilled, it changed the 2 to a 3 and a 3 for row 3. And for row 4, it changed it to a 4 and a 4 and a 5 and a 5 and a 6 and a 6. So it didn't just do a straight copy of the formula. It's not the exact same formula, but it changed the cell references according to which row we were in. So when I dropped down one row, the 2's changed to 3's. And that's important to recognize because when we just do a regular old cell reference like this, called a relative cell reference, then when you do a fill, that number is going to, those row numbers are going to change. If I were to fill over, the columns would change. So that's important to recognize what happened there when we did that autofill. For now, I'm just going to leave all these bulk discounts at 0. We won't mess around with those yet. And we'll just say that the adjusted price is the subtotal minus the discount. And obviously there's no discount, so it's going to be the same. And I'm going to accept the autofill. And I'm going to put my border back. So no discount yet. I'll talk about those in a second. Next, I'm going to talk about sales tax. So here, the sales tax is your price times your, I could do this. I could type 6% and I could hit enter, right? And I could fill that down and that would work out just fine for what I'm doing here. But then let's say that the sales tax did change. I go to a different state and the sales tax is 7%. Changing it here isn't going to help because my formula right now has 6% in it. So I could change my formula. Up in the formula bar, I could change that to 7% and hit enter. But then these other ones are all still 6%. So I would have to grab that and fill that down again, and that would change those all to 7%, right? So every time the sales tax changes, if I were to travel to different states or if the tax rate were to change over time, I'd have to go in and I'd have to fix this formula and I'd have to fill it down for all the rest of them if I remembered to fill it down. So that's not really a good way to do it. So instead of doing it that way, let's see, I'll get rid of these. Instead of doing it that way, I'm going to do it this way. Equals the adjusted price times, and I'm going to click down here on cell B10 where my 6% is. So that's the same thing that I just did. It's going to be the adjusted price times 6% because that's what's in cell B10. When I hit enter, it works 719. But the problem now is if I try to fill it down, the second sales tax is completely unreasonable. The third sales tax looks like it could be reasonable, and then I don't get any sales tax. And why is this happening? Why did it not work? And it goes back to the same thing that happened when we did the subtotal. If I look at this formula, it's F2 times B10, and then when I filled it down, it became F3, which is great, but then it multiplied by B11, which is the number 10. It's not multiplying by 6% anymore. And then it changed to B12 and B13 and B14. So those aren't, when I filled it down, it also moved the 6%, it moved that down as well. And so that's why it doesn't work for everything below the first row. So as I'm entering this formula and I'm thinking about this, I click on cell F2, the adjusted price. And I know that I want to fill this formula down for the other 5. So if I know that I want to fill it down, I got to think, do I want that F2 to move down as well? In this case, I do. So I'm going to leave that as a relative cell reference. And I'm going to multiply this by the 6%. Now, when I click on this cell B10, 6%, I'm thinking, when I fill this down, do I want that 6% to move down? And in this case, I don't. So here's where we need to use what's called an absolute cell reference. I'm going to put a $ in front of the B, and I'm going to put a $ in front of the 10. So instead of just B10, it shows up as $B, $10. That's what's called an absolute cell reference. It says, look at cell B10 and use the number that's in cell B10. But if you fill this formula, if you copy it, if you paste it somewhere else, don't change B10. Leave it locked in place. So when you do that, I still get 719, but when I fill it down for the other four, now it gives me more reasonable sales tax values. And if I show you my formula, it shows that when I grabbed it and filled it down, F2 changed to F3 and F4 and F5 and F6, but B10 always stayed B10. That's what those dollar signs do. They lock it in place. So that's called an absolute cell reference, and it's really good for something like this. And now if I change this to a 7%, oops, sorry, I got to put my values back, or an 8%, all those sales tax values change because I'm looking at cell B10 always. So that's how we did that. The item total is really just the adjusted price plus your sales tax. And it's going to suggest an autofill for that. I'm going to say no, and I'm just going to do it by hand. So that adds those two numbers together. So that sales tax is where when you use an assumption and when you want to point to a cell and always use that cell, that absolute cell reference comes in handy. The bulk discount is a little tricky, and it has to use an if. So I'm going to show you how I did that as well. This is an if function. So I type equals if, and I have another video that talks about the if function in more detail. But what I want to do is I want to check to see if the quantity, if I bought, in this case I'm buying 11, so that's in cell C2. And if that quantity is greater than or equal to the bulk discount quantity. So I bought 11, I get a discount at 10. In this case, I'm checking to see, is that quantity more than the discount quantity? In this case, it would be. But once again, I'm going to think about filling this down. And when I fill this down, do I want the C2 to move down? I do. But do I want the B11 to move down? I do not. So the B11 would need to get locked in place. So that's where I use an absolute cell reference, add the dollar signs. And then with an if function, you put a comma. And what happens if this thing is true? What if C2 is more than B11? What if 11 is more than 10? Then I'm going to get a discount. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply the subtotal. And I'm going to think about, when I fill this down, do I want that number to move down? I do. I'm going to multiply by the discount rate, which is in cell B12. When I fill this formula down, do I want that to move down? I do not. So I'm going to use an absolute reference there. So if I bought more than the number down here, then I'm going to multiply my subtotal times the discount rate, and then a comma. And what if you didn't buy more? There's going to be no discount. So I'm just going to put a 0. So the if function, it's a little bit complicated, but it also illustrates that when I'm using cell reference, regardless of whether the if function makes a ton of sense to you or not, when you're using a function or a formula, if you don't want the number to move, if you don't want the cell reference to move when you fill it, then you need those absolute cell references. So this does give me a bulk discount because it's true. If I fill that down and show you my formulas, you can see that the C2 changed to C3, C4, C5, C6. The B11 did not change because it's an absolute cell reference. The D2, D3, D4, D5, D6, relative cell reference. B12 did not change, and the 0 obviously didn't change as well. So that's how this thing works. And it uses this idea of assumptions and absolute cell references to lock a cell reference in place. And it's pretty handy. It comes in handy in a lot of places. If you found this useful, I'd appreciate a like or a subscribe, share it with your friends, and thanks for watching.